the social sciences. So if all of you are psychology majors, then I would be the person that you'll meet with. And I promise I don't typically show up to meetings late. This is a rarity. But if you have questions about anything we talk about today, grad school considerations, anything along those lines, that's what I'm here to help you with.
Highly recommend. I've harassed her multiple times for my help as a senior. While you were gone, we did inform them to sign in. We also put these QR codes on like a couple of like alternating slides at the beginning. And then we kind of just told them like the basics of what a CV is and how a CV may differ from a resume. And then of course, please elaborate because you are the expert on this topic compared to us.
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, I think I came in while you were all talking about it. And I would say that you were pretty much nailing it on the head that a CV is really meant to be the story of your life. Like I'm pretty sure that's the exact translation of it from Latin. And so there is a lot of space for you sharing all the pieces that you mentioned, those credentials, the awards you receive, the research you're interested in, depending on what you're applying for, even like the interests that you have in terms of research is useful. And a resume is like, these are only the parts that are like, this is only going to contain the pieces that matter to you, and everything else is not, I'm not even going to include because they're going to skim it really quickly. The other piece is that when it really depends on like the environment that you're applying to. So if you're applying to a position in academia, CV. If you're applying to something that's in industry or in like more like your typical job, for lack of a better word, you want a resume.
Okay. Would you like me to stop sharing my screen so you can share the slides? Would that be easier?
I'm happy to let you go through. I'll tell you when I'm ready.
Okay. So here you go.
Yeah. So when you're thinking about formatting a CV, there's two different types, the functional format and a chronological format. Chronological is typically what people will see in a resume, where it's really focused on time and the positions that you have and the skill sets that you developed within a particular position. But most, or not most, but CVs often will take the place, it could be either chronological or what's called functional. Students are less familiar with what a functional resume looks like. But generally, you're focusing on skill areas. So like in this example, they might be on research, it could be on writing, it could be on teaching, it could be on, you know, anything that you might see, leadership, communication, but it's not necessarily tied specifically to the job. So yeah, right down there you see the different types. So again, you're focusing on those pieces because maybe you pulled a lot of your research experience from your classes or a variety of research positions, and a lot of those skills are the same. So putting multiple like entries on your resume for that repeat themselves is not super useful. So focusing on the skill sets instead can allow you to provide a little bit more detail and expand where you need to. Great to list the skills. Again, emphasizing skills that you develop through a variety of activities, not just the ones you were paid to do or your research. And that also allows you, like if you got great experience, but maybe it was from a part-time job that may not be as relevant, you can really focus on those relevant skills. I will say too, though, it's often used, I think that's a really good point, the functional format is often used by people who have a lot of experience that's maybe not super relevant to what they're applying for. So this could be like, if you've done research all your life and now you want to go into education, focusing on communication skills, leadership area might be really, really important. Also for folks that have a lot of experience that is very repetitive, like that research. I often give the example of like nurses. A lot of times nursing jobs are the same between each one. So if you had the same job over and over again, it would get really boring and repetitive. There is a hand raised. Does Jackie have a question? Or is that from earlier?
It might have been from earlier. We had asked questions. What do you know about a CV? Like raise your hand if this is your first time kind of thing.
Okay.
Please do raise your hand if you guys do have questions, or you can unmute yourself and ask.
Also really fast, just also keep in mind any of the questions that you put in the RSVP form, we will be addressing later on in the slides. So you don't have to worry about like reiterating those questions you initially asked.
Okay. And yes, like I said, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to raise your hand or unmute yourself, because I do want to make this interactive for you and make sure we do get those questions asked. So especially as we transition to the other sections, if you haven't seen your question addressed, then don't hesitate to bring it up. So, is there a question? Somebody unmuted.
Me?
Olivia, I think. Oh, that's you. Never mind. Okay. So, my bad. I just saw somebody unmuted. So when it comes to formatting a CV with a functional resume, again, you want to think, or functional format, you want to think in themes of skills. So think about your, again, research, leadership, work. A lot of times they're like, if you are writing towards a grant, if you've done poster presentations, like if anybody's participating in RPsych this week, or if anybody's participating in the undergraduate research symposium this week, those presentations can go on your CV because it's a space where you have highlighted some of the work that you've done and communicated that with other people who may not have any experience in this area of research that you focused on. Yes, education is always there as well, and it's usually there first for a CV throughout your career. So yeah, these are kind of the big pieces, and I think we're going to go into a little bit more detail as we go through, right? Okay. So here, listing contact information. So there's kind of two components here. One being like obviously putting your own contact information on your resume or CV. You want to have your name, minimally your phone number and email address. I know some people don't feel as comfortable putting their street address, so it's not necessarily required. Some people feel comfortable putting the city and state that they live in, and that's it. That's also fine. But making sure that you have the phone number and the email, and LinkedIn if you have it, that's a great addition. So those are really, really important because you want to give people that opportunity to connect with you, call you for an interview, email you for an interview, whatever that looks like. But there's also some times where it's appropriate to list the people that you have worked with. And so specifically, I would say in research, it's more relevant where you're working under a PI or under a faculty member. Listing like that lab that you're in or your supervisor could be useful, because if people, especially if you're looking for work in that field, they're going to know who that person is potentially. But it also gives that little bit of credibility. It's not required everywhere. I would say primarily, again, when it's in research opportunities. So, you know, there may be a space for you, and there's, I think, an example on the next slide on what that may look like.
I just wanted to add also, when you list your contact information, one detail people forget a lot, make sure that your voicemail is up to date, sounds professional. You don't have anything like, hey, it's me, because that's, if they do call it, you want it to sound professional as possible.
That's a really good point. You want to, I always say like at least do the piece where you record your name because they know they reached you. But yeah, if you still have the voicemail that's like, hello, I can't hear you, they will hang up and they probably won't want to interview you. So just everybody do a little gut check and make sure that your voicemail is one, set up, and two, professional, so that folks want to leave a message after they've heard it. So thank you for bringing that up, Olivia. It's a really good point. Now, when you're putting experience, and the experience is kind of like the biggest area of your CV, this is where you're going to provide a lot of your experience, understanding your skill sets, the things that you've accomplished. So really spend a lot of time on this component because it's going to be really, really important. Now, this is kind of going back to what we were talking about like if you have experience in a variety of areas. So this could be volunteer, research, work, leadership. So those of you who are on the leadership of Sci-Chi, having that as leadership experience. If you've been involved in research, then you can have a research experience section. The beauty of doing this is that one, as mentioned here, it keeps your resume organized. And as people are skimming really quickly across your CV, they're going to be able to find what they're looking for very, very quickly if it's organized. The other thing is that, let's say that you were involved in research your freshman year or maybe your sophomore year, and you took some time off because you needed to find a job your junior year, and so you haven't been involved in research more recently. If you create separate setting or separate headings like research experience, even though that's older, you can move categories around however you need to. So there's a lot of value in if you can separate them out, doing that. Okay. So before I move on, are there any questions on that piece? My favorite question is, are there any questions? So, okay. And I should have the chat. I see there are chats coming in, but now listing experience, another great point. So a lot of times students get caught up in like, does it have to be paid experience to count? Not on your resume or your CV. So sorry, I use them interchangeably, but for the purposes of this workshop, if I do say resume, it does apply to CV as well. So even if you did volunteer research, volunteer work just in general, any experience is relevant. This can even be course projects that you do. So within any of your classes, if you've done extensive research on a topic that's very valuable to what you're applying for, you can include that and highlight it even though it's a course project. Again, presentations, we talked about what that looks like. Student organizations, whether you are a member or you have leadership experience, all of it is really valuable. It just may be different how you format it. If you do research, and that could be for credit, not for credit, paid, unpaid, whatever that looks like, research is still research. Of course, internships and volunteering, we talked about class projects. Even if you do things on your own. So if you're managing projects, creating work groups together, during coronavirus, a lot of people are experiencing mental health challenges. And so if you've had the opportunity to create your own kind of program with you and your friends, even though it's very informal, that's something that you have done where maybe you're sharing research or things like that are really, really relevant. So that's kind of like what is included in the experience section. Now, the talking about it part, that's where it gets a little bit more challenging because it's easy for us to list the things that we've done, the experiences we've had. It's a little bit harder to describe them. So when you're listing your experience, think about what it was that you were doing. So these are some really, really good examples. If you're collecting data, conducting interviews, maybe you're analyzing data, maybe you're sharing your assignments and your group projects with your PI or with your grad supervisor if you have one. Maybe you're doing like you're even cleaning at a part-time job. Like there's so many different types of experience, and there are so many different responsibilities that you have that you can highlight in your CV. A big thing that I see on a lot of CVs is that students don't necessarily always use action verbs to start those statements. So you want to have on your CV 2 to 5 bullet points on average, I would say. That's not a hard line. So some of you may find you have 7 or 8 bullet points, or maybe you only have like 1 or 2. That's okay. What matters more is that there's a balance between different types of experience than that you fall into a very specific bucket. And you want all of those all of those bullet points to start with an action verb. So think about so rather than saying responsible for, you might say tutored. Now they're mentioning this example was establish positive rapport, because if you don't do that, you can't really tutor somebody, right? If they don't trust you. So think about it in terms of how can you start with that action verb rather than saying responsible for or duties included or something like that. Just checking to see if there's any questions that are coming through. Okay, so how to list it and how to format it, that's also can be a challenge. And I know the group leader sent you all some samples, so you can definitely take a look at that as well. Key things you want to include: organization, your position title, location, and dates that you were involved. So Yes, close to the first line as possible, month, year to month, year. And yes, so if you want to like bolding, you can play with bolding in terms of what you decide to bold. Some people prefer to bold their organization name and not their job title. Some people prefer the job title and not their organization name. I would say play with it, because at the end of the day, you need to like what it looks like. And if you are not happy with it one way or the other, then make it so that you are proud of it and it's something that you want to send out. And then that's where you move into those bullet points where you're describing what it is that you did. So you can see this really good example here on the slide.
One thing I do want to mention is that if the position is current, we kind of highlighted it in orange on the bottom left-hand side. If you are currently in a position, so how the example says September 2018 to present, make sure that your verbs, that you're using present tense, right? So collaborate and develop and perform, versus if you had quit this job and you got a different position and you're still listing this on your CV. If it's in the past, then you'd use past tense, right? So collaborated versus collaborate.
Yeah, and know that this is the hardest part, honestly, of writing ACV. So when you're thinking about it, like a lot of times we can think about, like in this example, creating a web application, or like you're working on a team, right? But you may not know, how do I expand out on that so that the reader knows what I did and has like a full picture of this. And so some tricks that I use are like, when you're coming up with that list, just like make a list of the stuff you did, your responsibilities, and don't worry about it having the action verb yet. Just start it, make a list of things. And then once you have this list of, 3, 5, 7, whatever number of items that you did during this particular experience, you want to ask yourself questions. So think about, how did I do this? So like, how did they collaborate with the team? By dividing up tasks to ensure the completion of the project. Why did they do that? In this case, it was to explain, or to ensure the completion of the project. The next line, why were they creating a web application? To streamline tutoring scheduling. So thinking about like the how and the why, but also the how often or how many. So in that, like, collaborate with 4 people. Because, if you're like, even in the example of this, like to create a webinar and a workshop for your members, how often does this group meet? And, to see that, there's 37 people in this meeting. So having that, like being able to speak to hosting regular meetings and even adjusting to those being online when the coronavirus caused the campus closure, like that in and of itself could be a statement. So you want to be mindful of not just the what and the how and the why, but also how often are you doing this and how many people are involved. Okay. And then once you have that list, like, so now to revisit, we've made this list of what we did, and then we've asked these questions. We pick a couple of them. We don't have to answer all those questions all the time, but we pick maybe the one that speaks to this particular job the most. And you turn that into a sentence by finding a verb that makes it all work. Now, again, this is the hardest part of a resume or a CV. So if you're struggling with this, this is something that you could make a drop-in appointment, or you could make an appointment with me, and I would be very happy to walk you through your experience and see how we can best highlight it for employers.
I want to just re-emphasize to definitely take her up on that. It's such a big help. Also, any chance you get, ask your peers that have also been working on their CV to look it over. Ask maybe grad students in your lab for feedback. Mm-hmm. And I just also want to add, when you're brainstorming how to list your experience for a position you're in, one tip I was given by a grad student was, if someone was going to replace you in that job, what would be the tasks you would have to tell them they need to know how to do what you were doing? Just write those down, and then you can start picking from what you came up with.
That's a great tip. And another one is to, like, sometimes you do something in the beginning of a job or research experience or whatever it is, and you never really have to do it again, but that was a really important piece, or maybe you developed the skills. So in addition to, like, what would you have to tell your successor? Because I think that's like perfect advice. The other thing to consider is like updating it regularly. So keeping in mind that this whole document is living. It's something that's always going to be changing, because like work I was doing 6 months ago is different than the work I'm doing right now in my job because of coronavirus, but also for a variety of other reasons. So know that like your job changes and sometimes you forget the things that you do. So try to revisit this on a fairly regular basis so that you're not forgetting those really important skills you're developing. So we may struggle with a number of experiences that we can list. Yeah. So what I would say is have a whole version of like have what I call a master CV or a master resume that just has everything on it, because like you might have a ton of experience. Some of you probably have like 5 pages worth of experience right now, and others of you might only have like 1 or 2 experiences altogether, and that's okay. But knowing what you have, just put it all together so it becomes the thing that you can pull from if you don't want to include everything later down the line. But you may also want to include those technical skills. So the key there is the technical part, the things that are very objective. So when we say things like coding, like interviews, coding data, and things like that, if you're working with live participants, those you want to stick to things that are very, very objective, and employers can know what that means without you having to tell a story about it. So you notice that none of those, like organizing lab materials is different than organizing, like just organizational skills, both of which are important, but being able to make it a little bit more objective by saying I'm organizing these materials is what makes it something that is a little bit like, that's what makes it stand alone. If you are looking at, if you wanted to have organization skills in general, that's where you want to make sure that's going into a statement in your experience section, because it's hard to know what that means from person to person, because we all have our own levels, we all have our own definitions of what that looks like. You want to really describe that, it's a little bit more subjective. Yeah, so it is all about how you market yourself. I'm just refreshing myself here, but for grad school, you want to, so grad school is a little bit different than jobs too, right? Because in grad school, you are probably going to be doing some research depending on the program you're applying to. And so really highlighting all the skills you've developed, depending on what it is, they may really appreciate your involvement in your extracurricular activities. So you really want to be mindful of your audience, because what they care about is what you want the document to reflect, no matter how long, again, that may take it. Special classes, yeah. So if you have had the opportunity, maybe your major is not necessarily in alignment with the classes that you, or with the program that you're wanting to consider or pursue, or even the job that you're looking for, but you've taken a class that's very, very relevant to said program or job. You may really, really want to highlight those classes to show the employer that, yes, in fact, I have taken something and I have developed some knowledge in this area or school. So the key there is like either classes outside your major that are not required, or electives that may be within your major, but not everybody has to take. So like, for example, you're not going to put gen psych down because everybody knows that a psychology major takes general psychology. You want to stick to those areas that like not everybody takes. Yeah, so that's exactly what we've been saying about working with what you have and recording everything. It's why revisiting it so frequently is really, really important. A general rule I would say is maybe like every 6 months at least, revisiting it to make sure that you've just got everything on there, and we can take off the stuff that's less relevant later. But the better part is just to put it where you can.
We have a really good question in the chat from Alvin.
So it says, I have a leadership experience outside of UCR, but my coordinator does not have a doctorate or a master's degree. So you may not need to necessarily list that contact on your CV. It depends on what the experience is. Because I would say, again, that the best time to list a supervisor is in the context of research. So if that experience was outside of it, then I wouldn't necessarily worry about it. So I don't know if that answers your question, Alvin, but please feel free to unmute and ask further if that doesn't answer it.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Thank you. Because I was just kind of confused because I did a leadership experience outside, so it's like a coach, like a youth leader experience. But like
Mhm.
I said, he doesn't have a doctorate or master. So what I even can I list the leadership experience without listing the person's name, or
Mhm.
would I still have to?
I don't think you need to. I mean, I would say just list it because it's still there. It's not a required piece by any means. And
Hmm.
like even on the CVs that I have looked at and like samples, quite frequently, like if you were to look at your faculty CVs, probably the only time they're going to list a supervisor is when they were earning, like writing their dissertations, and who was on their committee, because that was like a foundational, like these people have really structured, which is why I would say that if it's like, especially if it's not research related, whatever this leadership experience was, I don't think the contact name is as relevant or as necessary.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Some general things in terms of formatting. So a lot of times students have a lot to share, and so they want to try to use really small font. And I would say not go smaller than 10 because it becomes hard to read if they need to print it. um, and then but then you don't want to go too large either, so 12, because otherwise it starts to look a little wonky on the page. What really helps is if you look at the print preview of your document, just to see like how does this look on the page kind of holistically, does it look nice. um, Margins generally half an inch to an inch all the way around. So again, if you need it to create more space, then go for a slightly smaller margin. Again, smaller than half an inch, and you risk things not being printed on the page should they need to print. And a lot of people like to print things and read it hard copy. Um, yes. So if you go on to more than one page, like maybe you have a page and a half, then I would recommend limiting the things that are less relevant, like take those out to make it one page. Play with your margins, play with your spacing, play with your font size to see what you can do to make sure that it's going to fit onto one page. Because it's better to have complete pages until you get to the CV that's like 35 pages, and then the last one can be a half. That's fine. We talked about making sure you use those action verbs, using industry language. That's so important as you're looking at job postings in the future. And even like as you're looking at programs for graduate study, what kind of things are they listing as values for their program and what they're studying? And can you fold those words into your document as well? Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if our leaders can answer it about getting experience, starting with experience now as a junior.
It's definitely not too late. A lot of transfer students are in this position, right? I'm not sure if you're a transfer student, Jennifer, but UCR, specifically psychology, that we have a really high population of transfer students. So this is, yeah, I was a transfer student too. So it is not too late to get started on your experience. The sooner the better. This applies for your research experience. This applies for working experience. This applies for like volunteer and leadership experience. Definitely get started now. And then when you are around this time in your senior year next year, you'll be much better suited than if you had started like your senior year.
Can you also privately message me your email? We actually last week did a presentation on how to get involved in research experience specifically. And so I think that information will be really helpful for you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so to revisit, we were on the second column. So tailoring your CV to the skill set needed. Yeah, so sometimes that might mean even rewriting some of those statements to really reflect what it is that they're looking for. I think there's a sample further down of like how you, with a sample job, where we can maybe talk about how to do that a little bit more hands-on. But generally, you want to make sure you're speaking to the skill sets that they're asking for, and also the language that they're using. Avoiding personal pronouns. So you don't want to use any I, me, my, our, any of those things. What you might do is say, I did blah, 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 and then just take out the I. Use the active voice again, starting with like, pretend like it starts with I did this thing, I accomplished, I developed, I created, I analyzed, whatever that looks like. But that's what's going to help you have that active voice, because another trend that I'll see with students as I'm looking at CVs and resumes both is that sometimes they'll say, I assisted with, or I helped with, but often they do whatever it is that they were saying they helped with or assisted with. So, you know, when you say I assisted with organizing the data, that's different than you assisted students as they develop their understanding of whatever, you know. So like if you were saying you helped a thing, but you actually did the thing, then just put that you did the thing, because that's more active. Include your relevant experience. Again, we talked a lot about that. Making sure it's error free. Cannot say this enough. There are certain programs and employers who are very, very picky, and any mistakes, that's the reason they don't want to bring you in. So proofread, read it out loud, have a friend read it, and that will help you avoid those things. Of using proper tense, we talked about that. So if you're currently doing the position, present tense. If you're no longer in that area, past tense. And of course, if you have a LinkedIn or you have your portfolio, GitHub for coding, absolutely include that, because it's going to demonstrate your skill set, particularly for GitHub and portfolio. And so, this came from the psych website, right?
Yes. Sorry, I think I snuck it in. So for those of you who might not have seen this before, I recently utilized this since I'm a senior and I'm applying for jobs. But this is a very good example of how to take tasks that you're given as an RA and how to apply them to, if you're applying for a job, let's say the furthest right column, if you're applying for a job out in the field, if you're applying straight for a PhD program or a master's program. This is a really good way to see like how you can translate and kind of fit your experiences into something that's applicable. I know a lot of the times if you have experience coding, like data entry, you can kind of like question yourself, like, how the heck is this relevant to getting a job in this area of psychology? But this is like a good example of how you can set that up.
Yeah, this is super useful. I'm like really happy that they've put this together, because yeah, a lot of times we do get hung up on those small tasks that we don't feel are very relevant. But even though you may not do like data entry in the future, it's minimally going to teach you some of those computer skills, and it's maximally going to make you appreciate the folks that are doing that in future labs where you might be the leader, because you remember what that feels like. It's kind of like, you know, a lot of students discount doing customer service jobs and working part-time at like a Kohl's or a JCPenney or a Walmart. But that teaches you so much in the context of like patience, communication skills, interpersonal skills. You know, the same thing goes for these kind of monotonous responsibilities that you may have in your research experience. All right. So questions from the members. Can we just go through these?
Yeah, these are just about CVs. I split up the cover letter ones later towards the end.
Okay. So how do you write your CV in a way that brings out the most useful aspects of a single experience or position? So that is where kind of a twofold answer, and I hope I'm explaining or interpreting this the correct way. But one, order is everything on your CV. So I'll often use the example, it's kind of irrelevant right now because we're not on campus, but even imagining that you are at the supermarket and you see the rack of magazines. And when you're looking at a magazine, you decide to pick it up. The reason you decide to pick it up is because whatever was on the cover was interesting, right? As when you were on campus, if you read the Highlander newspaper, you're picking that up because what was on that top half was something interesting enough for you to make you pick it up, unless you're a kind soul that just reads it because you really like it. But the same logic applies to your CV or your resume, in that you want your best stuff that's most relevant to that particular person or employer or grad program. You want that to be at the top. And then even within your experience, put your best statements, the ones that are most relevant, again, at the top. Those should be your 1, 2, 3 statements rather than like your 2, 5, and 6 statements. Does that make sense? So within, you can do that both structuring overall, but also within a section itself. Okay. What makes an applicant stand out? Honestly, the people who can explain their experience as it relates to whatever it is you're applying for the best. People will say it needs to be pretty, it needs to have color, it needs to have graphics. Generally speaking, they don't care about that stuff. They care, can I find what I'm looking for easily? And did they explain their ability to do this thing, whatever it is? And the folks that do that best, they're the ones who get brought in for the interview to be into the program. But it's really as simple as that. And that's the feedback that we get from employers and grad programs year after year. It's not about the showy things, it's about your content and you making the most of that space.
Also want to for the interviews, if you do get the interview, just be prepared to explain gaps in your CV. So if you were in a position from X time to X time, and then the next thing you list is maybe like a year forward and you don't have anything in between, they might ask about that. So when organizing your CV, if you can have a consistent organization that shows you were constantly doing something, I think that's going to stand out the best.
Yeah. And that's to where a functional resume or functional CV, can be a little bit more beneficial because it focuses more on skill development than timing. And so, because usually you'll just list like experience that you've had at the bottom and it's less important. It doesn't get as much real estate on your document. So that's another way to try to avoid that. I will say most students, like if the reason is because you needed to focus on school, most people are going to be pretty forgiving of that. It's more often to come up when you have been out of school for a while. So just keep that in mind as well. What kind of events are acceptable to put on a CV? Would attending a research conference count? Yeah. So I've actually attended conferences for my own work, for professional associations of which I'm a part, and I have put those on there because it shows that my commitment to professional development and continue to learn from my peers. So yes, I would absolutely include that. And typically you might put that almost like a citation. You can do that for your speaking, like if you're a poster presenter or you're presenting at a conference yourself or you're published. I usually list them as if you're citing an APA format because that's kind of keeps it clean. What about volunteer activities that are, yeah, absolutely. I think anything that's relevant to what you want to go into, you should absolutely include. Sometimes even over like paid experiences that are less relevant. How to improve, that depends on what it currently looks like. Hopefully today you've taken some takeaways that will help you to improve it. Yeah, that one's kind of challenging to answer at this moment.
I would have other people look over your CV and then they can tell you where you can work on it.
Do letters of recommendation have to be from people with a doctorate degree? Great question. I'm assuming this is in relation to grad school, but it could also be in relation to like research positions. For grad school, the nice thing is that you can ask. So you can reach out to admissions representatives if it's not clearly stated, because some programs are very specific that it needs to be from professors, not even TAs. Some will say it needs to be written by someone who can speak to your ability to be successful, and that might look like a supervisor, that might look like, you know, that could be a TA who you've worked under. So if you can ask, if it's a grad program like that, then I'd say send them an email and verify, because it's better for you to have a very strong letter written by somebody without the degree than something that's not so strong with somebody that has that degree. And then for positions, if it's like a research position and they're asking for letters, probably people who could speak to your ability to be strong in that area. So again, some people will be very picky and they will be very strict that it needs to be somebody with their degree, but others will not. So it really, really varies based on the position or the program. How do you change a resume to a CV? So for some of you, your resumes and CVs may not look that different yet. It depends on how much experience that you have and how much relevant experience that you have, but primarily focus on those research, focus on the awards you may have received. So just continuing to add things as you see fit. And honestly, your resume will start to just naturally transform into a CV because you're adding more experience and it's housing all of it. Whereas like that resume, again, might only be focusing on the important points for that particular thing you're applying for. As a recent grad, I didn't have any time to gain off-campus experience to do work such as volunteering at a group homes, ABA organizations. Okay. I mean, again, it depends on what you're applying for in terms of what you should add to your resume or CV. You can be very creative here. So again, like adding things that you did on campus, like don't discount those because, even if you were like, when you say, you didn't have time to do those things, that means you were probably filling your time with something else. So as long as you have something to show for what you were doing, that's going to be important, even if it's just a job on campus, like just a job. Because that's still going to have relevance and that's still going to show that you were doing things aside from like going to class and going home. Okay. But as far as like what you might do, that just depends on the experience you have and what you're applying to. The big takeaway from today, honestly, is that resumes and CVs don't really have like hard and fast rules. It's very subjective based on what you're particularly using it for and the experiences that you have. So keep that in mind that each one of you is going to have a slightly different looking CV or resume. What information is specific to psychology majors that would be expected on their CVs? And what would be the best way to stand out as a psychology major? So I think like as far as psychology majors, that one, like there's not necessarily any advice that like particularly psychology majors need to have this experience or need to have something on their CV. It really is like based on your interest. So if you want to go into research, you need to have research experience. If you are going to go into industry, then you need to have experience volunteering, shadowing, whatever that may look like. So there's not really like field specific, I would say, other than like if you want to go into, let's say, clinical mental health counseling, shadowing experience is going to be really important. So like that might be one specific piece. But again, I think that's almost at the level of the individual in terms of how specific, like what specific things you might need to highlight. But as a psychology major, I think getting involved. Psychology is, I think, the biggest major that UCR has. So we graduate out a ton of psychology students. And a lot of psychology students, they may, for a variety of reasons, not necessarily have any experience outside the classroom. So what can they do to really differentiate themselves? Focus on being involved if you can. So even the fact that you're part of this organization, again, as a member or as somebody with a title, that's something that can be there to show that you were invested in your growth. If you are doing research on campus, again, like that's going to be the thing that highlights it because not everybody does those things. So again, it's kind of unique to each person, but making sure that you're making the most out of the resources that you have and doing what's possible for you, that's what's going to make you stand out. Okay. Grad schools. Okay. So when it depends on the type of grad program that you're looking for. So how many of you are thinking about like a more of like an academic, like if you're going to graduate school, more academic, that might be a Master of Science in psychology or a PhD? By a show of hands, raise of hands on the thing, participant list. Okay, so I see a couple. What about, so if you all can lower your hands, what about those of you who are looking for maybe like a PsyD, or you want to go into therapy or counseling? Okay, so a little bit more. And then those of you who might be thinking more about like just going into industry or maybe something that's not even related to psychology per se. So some of you are open to a few different things. Okay. So grad schools, the reason I asked that question is because like if you're looking for an academic program that's going to value research, they want to see research. That is the experience that they want, because if you're committing to a 2-year master's program or potentially a 5 to 7 year doctoral program, they want to know that you really know what research is and that you like it and that you want to do it and you're passionate about it. And the only way you can show that you are passionate about it is by doing it as an undergrad. So getting involved in any way you possibly can is really important. But if you're looking for more of like that clinical route or therapy, then shadowing, any experience working with the population that you would like to work with, and that could be age, demographics, any sort of identity based, like look for experiences that are going to get you hands-on with that group of people, or just if it's in general, like any sort of helping opportunity you can do. So providing services to whoever that may look like. But do you see how like that's what I mean when I say that it really depends on the program, and it depends on what it is that you want to get out of it, because what you want is like the type of thing that you want to look for. That's what's going to help you, or what they're going to be looking for is just experience in that particular area. What to do when you're ready to apply but CV is empty or resume is lacking in experience. I would say come talk to me because there may be some things that maybe you haven't thought about or how to explain, or that you may not just know that you could put on to a document. And that's part of my job, is to ask those questions and have those conversations with you. So if there is anything hiding, then we can highlight it, or we can talk about alternative routes. Oh, some people are between a PsyD and a PhD. Thank you. Okay, so before we shift gears, are there any last questions on the CV piece? Okay, well, I guess we'll move on. Oh, let's see. What kind of clinical work can I do as an undergrad? A lot of shadowing, or it depends on, again, like any hands-on work with that population. So it may not be clinical, it may not be patient, but it might be a helping opportunity. So like a volunteer in a clinic, or like for students that are interested in clinical psychology, the Riverside Area Rape Crisis Center has a really great advocacy internship program. The only requirement is that you're 21 or older, but that's a really, really good experience that would be applicable to a graduate program that's more PsyD or Master's for Therapy or something along those lines.
Yeah, and another one off the top of my head is volunteering with Operation Safe House. I have told others, members about this before, volunteering with RARCC, Operation Safe House. You could even do Crisis Text Line, which is an online volunteer platform that teaches you a lot of clinical skills. I have a friend who just graduated from Cal State Fullerton's Master Social Work program, and she told me that a lot of the skills that she learned in her program, she also learned as a crisis text line counselor while she was an undergrad here at UCR. So I highly recommend that one as well.
I would also add the WOW and getting involved with Active Minds. Those are both campus-based organizations, and they look pretty good on a CV or resume.
So don't hesitate to ask your peers, because they know a lot too. Okay, so when does this end, just so I know my timing?
It's supposed to end at 5:30.
Okay, cool. We can do it, no worries. And are they going to get a copy of this presentation at the end?
I have this.
Okay.
And I'll also send up the slides.
Perfect. Okay, so I won't go with like too much into detail on all these things. We're going to cover the high points because you all are college students and you can read some of the pieces here. But cover letter in general, I love that it's your handshake to your potential employer. This is your introduction. This is the space where, like on your resume or CV, we talked about how it needs to be like just to the point. It doesn't need to be flashy or pretty. Your cover letter is your space to actually show your personality a little bit more to potential employers, particularly. Less frequent to have these for grad school applications, but this is where you get to express your interest in a very authentic way to a potential employer, talk about the experiences that have developed you. I really like it because you get the opportunity to really focus on some of those transferable skills like organization or leadership that may not be as easily discussed in your resume or CV. Because you get to have that space to really tell a story there. So even like expanding on those main points, that's what that's about, like being able to really tell a story and share more than just what's on like those bullet points. Those have to be limited. Key points there, make sure contact information. I use the same format that I would for my resume or CV, so it's very consistent across both documents. Salutation, so dear, ideally name of the person, but if not, dear hiring manager, dear search committee. It's great if we can get them, but sometimes it's really impossible. And then you have your actual cover letter itself. And you can read the open body and action request, but I kind of look at, and you can even go to the what to spotlight if you want slide or the next slide, because I look at a cover letter like a persuasive essay. It is your opportunity to showcase to an employer why you are the best person for this position. So you have your intro, body, conclusion. That's those paragraphs that were listed on the other slide. And then this is really what you want to highlight on this what to spotlight. So talking about, what experience do you have that's going to help you solve the organization's problems, or you really want to highlight some area of your work history that's really, really translatable and really a strong candidate for this position. Again, like if you want to focus on, like if you don't necessarily have the work experience, you can focus on anything you want. You can even focus on personal things, like if you tutored your little sibling in a subject that's very informal, you can really highlight whatever it is that you want. So when I'm talking about all these things and thinking about like those relevant skills or the work history or whatever it may be, you might be wondering, well, like what are those things? How do I know what they are? As you're reading, you want to highlight what skills are they asking for in that job description that you have. That can come from what's on your resume. It might come from something else, but usually you'll notice a theme of like 1 or 2 or 3 things that you've got that they're looking for. Those become the foundation of those paragraphs. And what you're going to do is do that persuasive essay where thesis statement, you're the best person for your job because 1, 2, 3, or maybe just 1, 2, or maybe 1. And then next paragraph, let me tell you about this thing and I'm going to sell you on it just like I would in a persuasive essay. And then you tie it back just like you would in a persuasive essay to your thesis statement. So you can say, the experience that I got doing this research project is going to help me to do whatever it is to help solve that problem, or outline some kind of actual piece of the job description. Like I will be able to do this because I've done that kind of thing. So I feel like that's kind of holistically summarizing what's on this slide. The other pieces that we haven't yet touched on is like the compelling angle, knowing what it is you're looking for. So in that one, like sometimes you're writing a letter because you're applying, sometimes you're writing a letter because it's something that you're asking to see if there's opportunities or how you can get involved. Like if those of you who are juniors looking for research, you could write a cover letter that is to a faculty member, are there opportunities for me to get involved in your lab? So knowing what it is you're hoping to get out of this letter before you write it, and addressing the appropriate person. Again, if you can, get that name. So I think we've talked about a lot of these things already. But the same thing that applies to your CV or your resume of having somebody else read it. If it makes sense to somebody else, that's good. Because sometimes when we're reading our own work, we fill in the details that make it make sense. But if someone else is reading it, they're like, what are you saying? So if they say that to you, know that they love you and they want it to be better. And so like, take that feedback and use it to improve your cover letter as well. I cannot emphasize the second point enough of not sending the same cover letter to every company. They can tell. Like when it says, I will be a great addition to your company, especially if it just says your company but even to me, whenever you say like, I will be a great addition to the career center, it's like, did you just like highlight this as the thing you need to change every time? Because like your paragraphs are not really relevant to me. It doesn't feel like you cared about this particular position. And especially right now with the economy the way that it is, the more you can really showcase your interest and why you're applying to this position, even if it's something you really have to like pull teeth or make sure you're like for why you're really interested in it, you need to do that work because they have so many applicants that they can hire. What makes you special? And again, don't settle for less than perfect. So like read it, put as much effort as you can. Know again, like on that statement, if you read that paragraph below, know that some people are not going to read it, even if you send it. For some people, it really matters, and for others, it doesn't at all. But know that it does not hurt you unless it's poorly written. So it's, for me, worth the effort in most cases. Pitfalls. So writing something that's too long, again, 1 page max. So if you've got too much, you need to start cutting things down, be your own little editor, or ask someone else, is this important? Do you think it's important to what they're asking for? Because again, if it's not showcasing your particular skill set for that job specifically, not going to do you justice. Don't talk badly about your former company, because employers will see, like, they'll just assume you're probably going to do the same thing to them. They always see that there's two sides to every story, and more often than not, they're going to side with the employer potentially. So just avoid that. Talk about, if you have a situation that you left on not so good terms, again, you can make an appointment. I'm happy to talk with you about how to highlight that experience in a resume, in an interview, in a cover letter, whatever it may look like. But really try to be as objective as possible with them. Yeah, you don't need to include salary yet. You don't really want to talk money until you have a job offer, if possible. So just kind of avoid that unless it's required and they are making you put that information in. Lying or embellishing, especially, like, so sometimes, when we give you the advice to put in that jargon from your industry, some people take that to the extreme and they really start to highlight, like, they'll use the big words even if it doesn't make sense, or they will oversell their experience. If you're doing that and you get the position, your employer is going to be very upset with you when you suddenly don't know how to do the thing you said you did, because theoretically you don't need training on that thing. Alternatively, if you put that on a document and then you go into an interview and they ask you about your experience doing this thing, and then it becomes very clear that you cannot tell the truth, again, not going to work in your favor. So be honest about your experience, and try not to overstate what you did. Don't include irrelevant information. Again, cut it and make sure it's as succinct as possible. And when it comes to polishing it, read it out loud. Again, does it make sense? Is there too many commas, not enough commas? Did you have like a grammar mistake somewhere? Just read it out loud, because that can help you. And sometimes, yeah, making a small change can really make your brain pay more attention, because when we work on it all the time, our brain will start to fix things. We will fix letters that have been transposed. And so I'm sure those of you who are doing data entry, you know that. So find those ways to really make or make it so that you can point out and notice those differences. Formatting. So I've talked a little bit about this already, but this is kind of like, in a nutshell, that persuasive essay piece. So first paragraph is, what's this for? So what are you applying for? How'd you find it? Why are you interested? And then again, like, so the more specific you can make that, if you can name drop somebody, if you know that you would that you followed this organization for a very long time, you can put that, and end it with, again, that thesis statement. I believe I would be an ideal candidate because blah, blah, blah. And then your body paragraph, again, that's focusing on those skill sets that you're bringing. That could be things, those skill sets, like in terms of the analytical skills, these are, again, those transferable skills that are harder to show on your CV. But can be very beautiful paragraph starters for your cover letter. And that conclusion, that's the part that's very rarely going to change. Thanks for considering my application. Hope to discuss my qualifications further. Sincerely, Kristen Roberts. And then these are some great examples that you can read. I would say, like, just in the interest of time, to read those once you get a copy of this, because I'm sure there are really good examples that highlight some of how to showcase your skill sets and experience. Oh, questions, okay. So same question here of, like, what makes an applicant stand out? Somebody who cares. So, like, when you can express your interest authentically, because you can tell when people are like, I was so excited and, like, I would just love to do this. You make such a difference. Like, if it's very wishy-washy and, like, just kind of like over exuberant and over excited without being very specific, they won't be excited by that. So a lot of times, like if it's authentic, if it's true, if you are really speaking to the experience that you have and the interest for the organization, like that is what's going to stand out. So just again, be true to who you are, and make sure that comes across, because that's what's going to be the thing that makes you unique. Do we need to include our cover letter for every job we apply for? Not necessarily, but I would recommend it in most cases. If it's required, absolutely. If it's not required, again, some people won't read it. Some people, they'll love the fact that you did, and that could really edge you over the competition who didn't, because you cared enough to write something. Again, the only exception to that rule is if you didn't write it very well. What should cover letters say? Hopefully we covered that, and hopefully that was fairly clear. How long should it be? 1 page. And where can we find jobs if we only have our psychology BA? Well, that's a great question too. And that depends on what it is you want to do with your psychology BA. Because some of you might be interested in something that's very applicable to what you've been studying. And some of you may be like, I like psychology. I don't necessarily want to make that the center of my career, and that's okay too. I am really excited to share with you all that actually next Wednesday, we're having a job fair that's all 10 UCs it's got, I think, 84 employers registered for it right now. And there are some that are like ABA therapy. There are education-based jobs. There's government-based jobs. So whatever your interest may be, there's business as well. Those are all things that you can do with a psychology degree. And so like, I would highly recommend, if you see the email, I think it was like sent over the weekend from Handshake, and it says 11 days and counting, I think is the subject line. But that is something like, that's one easy place, but also Handshake in general, and even LinkedIn can be useful for finding opportunities that are relevant to your major.
So this is also a little bit of information that I threw in towards, not sure if you were able to look over these slides, but these are just some things that I wanted to synthesize for psychology fields, and I know you can definitely speak on a few of these points. Mm-hmm. So finding psychology field jobs.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm happy to take the lead if you want me to. Like, I mean, LinkedIn is like your best friend. I would say go on LinkedIn. Do any of you have LinkedIn accounts? I do, Les, I know you do. All right, well, your homework is to go create a LinkedIn account, because LinkedIn actually has this really beautiful feature in the schools. Like, you can search every school, and for those of you who transferred, your community college or school that you attended otherwise also has a LinkedIn page. And on UCR, I think last time I checked, there were just under 100,000 people on LinkedIn who have listed UCR as a school that they attended. And that's huge. That is a network that you can tap into immediately. And you can actually filter alumni down by what they majored. So you could look for psychology majors in your geographic area to see where they're getting, like where they've worked. You can see how, if they filled out their profile and shown their work history, you can see what they did as soon as they graduated up to wherever they currently are. But you can also look for jobs on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is really, really useful. Again, if you're not sure how to do that, happy to talk with you in an appointment, or you can sign up for a drop-in, and one of our peer advisors is fantastic as well. You can search for positions on Indeed, on Handshake, on Career Shift, or ABA positions, mental health specialist. All of those are great for students that have a bachelor's degree. And even in the county, so local government organizations, a lot of opportunities are available, especially if you see, like, if there's a level and it's a level 1, then that's something that potentially you could be a good fit for, sometimes even level 2, depending on experience. Nonprofits as well. So anybody that's doing that helping profession, you know, if there's a cause that grinds your gears and you really want to like commit to it, you want to help to solve it, work towards it. That could be like housing insecurity, food insecurity, immigration, child, anything related, you know, like literally anything. There's nonprofits, criminal justice reform. There are nonprofits doing work around that. And you can look for it and really get that experience with a bachelor's degree. And yeah, that's a good point, especially knowing that if you're graduating, you're graduating into a pretty crummy economy. And so some of you might just need to get a job that's going to pay the bills. And that is also okay. That's not going to dictate your whole life. But no, because I think anybody would be fine, like most future employers, knowing what was going on in 2020, they're not going to judge what a graduate's first job is out of college right now. So do what you need to do to find employment, and don't feel that shame necessarily that it may not be in alignment with what your overall goals are.
I also wanted to add, just make sure you stay busy, especially if you're not going right into grad school. However many years you take, just make sure you're working or volunteering, and keep reaching back into UCR's network, because once you stop doing that and you like maybe don't keep in contact with anything related to UCR for a year, it's really hard to come back and like try to tap into those resources. So make sure you continue to utilize UCR.
Yeah, so to add on to the last bullet, right? So kind of like what Kristen and Olivia were saying, as a senior, and for those of you guys who are also graduating, I know that there's pressure for us to find like good jobs right out the gate, finding full-time jobs, especially if you're taking a gap year. That's my plan. I plan on taking a gap year 1 to 2 while I build up research experience. But at the end of the day, if you can't find like the ideal job for you right now, that's okay. I mean, coronavirus is kind of hurting all of us. And then working at like Starbucks while you still volunteer and you're still getting research experience, that looks, I think, in my opinion, that looks just as good as if you had a full-time research job or if you had a full-time job working in a group home. To still have that experience, it's experience no matter what. It doesn't matter if that's your main source of income or not, right? And then one more thing that I do want to add to the nonprofits. A lot of nonprofits hire straight from their volunteer pool. So I currently work at Operation Safe House, but I know that in the shelter, if you volunteer there, you do have to pay $90 to do a background check. But if you think of it as like an investment for your future, you volunteer there for a little bit and they will hire you. And that is incredible experience. People from California Baptist University, people from CSUSB, UCR students, a lot of people try to get into Operation Safe House because it's such a good experience and it's such a good starter clinical experience. So that would be applicable if you're going for social work or a PsyD or something like that. So I definitely recommend you looking into Operation Safe House, and you guys can always email me if you have questions about Operation Safe House specifically, but I highly recommend it. And I also highly recommend utilizing LinkedIn.
Just for clarity on the nonprofits, because I've had this question before, nonprofits does not mean that you don't get paid unless you're in a volunteer capacity, but they do hire people to be employees and they do pay them. You won't make as much money necessarily as you would in like a for-profit company, but essentially what a for-profit versus nonprofit is like any extra money that organization makes. In a for-profit, that goes to the stakeholders, so like your CEOs or your trustees or whatever that may look like. At a nonprofit, any extra money that is fundraised or is just above and beyond operating costs goes to the cause that they are working on. So that's what that means. It's not a reflective of like not being paid in the work.
That's a really good point. I probably should have clarified. I do get paid working at Operation Safe House. So you do start out as a volunteer and then you can build to being an actual paid employee. I did get a question asking if they're doing remote opportunities. For the emergency shelter, I'm not entirely sure if they are. If you email me, I can put you in contact with a person who oversees volunteering and like employment relations, and then you can ask them that question because I personally don't know. I don't work in the emergency shelter. I do mental health outreach. So it is 5:28. I had a hands-on
I had been on time. It's my bad.
No,
if I had been on time, we would have gotten through it.
Okay, it's more important that they hear things from your perspective and your expertise than like this scenario. I mean, this is important, but you guys can also do this after I send out the slides. Essentially what I was gonna do, because I had a feeling a lot of people here were considering counseling work or going for a PsyD or something in the applied field. So I was just gonna have you guys look at the application link for this behavioral therapist position. And then you would kind of look at the qualifications, the job description, and you were going to build a CV and a cover letter tailored to this position. There is more information here. If you guys still want to do it, feel free. I kind of like mapped this out for you guys. But this is just kind of
office hours and do this exercise with us.
You can, yeah, definitely. You can always do that. We kind of mapped out some of the basic steps for you to just synthesize all of the things that we've talked about today. Yeah, but I'm going to skip over this just in the interest of time. Yeah, if you'd like to wrap anything up, Kristen.
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to say thanks again for inviting me to be a part, and my apologies again for being late. But yeah, I mean, I would say know that as you go through, you're going to experience some challenges writing a resume or a CV or a cover letter. They're all very challenging documents, especially if you don't have as much experience with them. So know that it does get easier the more practice you put into it. And, you know, as you continue building this skill, it is a skill as well. But if you have questions, thank you for putting this slide up here. You're all welcome to set up appointments, take advantage of drop-in during because we're closed and we're doing drop-ins virtually. We have made them 15 minutes instead of 10. So we don't offer quite as many, but I will say that students have not been taking advantage of them. So you probably could pretty easily get one. Those are offered Monday through Friday. So the schedule changes kind of day to day, depending on if yours are available in the evening as well. But please don't hesitate to take advantage of drop-ins, of appointments with me, because that's what we're here to help you with at the Career Center, is like any of these questions that you might have that are very unique to your situation. We recognize that, and we're here to help you with it.
Also plug, go to the job fair that she advertised. Also our psych this Thursday.
Yeah.
There's some great things you can add.
Also plugging, just kind of reiterating that our general meeting is tomorrow, and we're having 2 graduate students. We will be going over their like full CVs, and they'll be giving us their advice and their perspectives on CVs in the psychology field. So that's just kind of like a nice way to kind of like wrap up and synthesize things we've talked about today, and then getting like to psychology graduate students' perspectives and CVs. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but if you guys have any additional questions, feel free to ask them now. I will be sharing the PowerPoint. I will also be sending the recording out like I usually do.
Yeah, I just also want to say getting started is definitely the hardest part. So I just want to challenge you guys today, while this information is fresh in your minds, just set a timer on your phone for like 10 minutes and like put down a bulleted list of things you might put on your CV, and then try to go back to it every week for at least like 20 minutes or so. And then you'll start to get into the flow of things. Don't keep putting it off. You don't want to try to scramble at the last minute when you need your CV or a cover letter.
Yeah, definitely. Utilize that template that I emailed you guys. Just take out whatever is relevant, or take out whatever is not relevant, and just put down everything you can. Kind of like brainstorm / word vomit all of your experiences that you can think of right now. And then I did this probably about a year ago. And then as that's sitting there, right, the master document sitting there, I would be like watching TV or doing schoolwork, and I'm like, oh, hey, I totally forgot. I have experience doing this and I didn't put it on my CV. And then I'll go pull it up and just add to it. So you may not remember everything immediately, but if you start this process, you kind of snowball it, and it's like, it's so much easier to keep track of everything, like Kristen was saying, having a master document. But yeah, do you guys have any last questions before signing off? Nope. Okay, I don't think I see any. Thank you everyone for coming out, and thank you Kristen for coming and doing a workshop with us. We really appreciate it. And again, guys, I really recommend you going to see Kristen. She will be your best friend in building your CV and doing pretty much everything when you're looking for jobs and all of that. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing.